It's been a while since the Direct aired, and over the past couple of days, we've seen this huge barrage of criticisms toward the console. Towards the price point, towards the games, towards Nintendo's business strategies, uh, toward like all sorts of like weird conspiracies and ideas. What we're witnessing is essentially the dying gasps of 90s gamer culture. This idea that Nintendo is this brand that we all universally despise, because that's what we've been dealing with for like the past 30 years, is this mindset that Nintendo is awful, that they're an evil corporation, and that they're holding gaming back, and only the saviors of Sony, Xbox, and PC could hope to save us from this menace with uncensored games, with violence, with mature games for mature gamers. Like these were all things that were thrown at us for years, right? Decades, right? And we're finally seeing the chickens come home to roost, right? We're seeing Nintendo like hit it out of the park with all of their major gaming IPs. They've branched out into movies, and we're at the point now where they are the market leader in the gaming industry. And I keep seeing people try and dispute this, but when you look at just how successful the Switch has been, when you look at all these successful games, when you look at like how well received the Switch 2 has been, the reality is very clearly that the Switch 2 is going to be a success, and that like everybody coping and seething is just kind of doing so for clickbait purposes, right? And I do think that's the major takeaway we need to say at this stage, right? This console is going to be extraordinarily successful. The Direct was extremely well received, and all we're seeing now in regards to the criticisms from nobody YouTubers like Real Life Gay Wizard, or I don't know, Craig from Screw Attack, Craig the Snake, like all these guys are doing is just kind of sitting there being like, I don't know if people will be willing to pay $450 for a Nintendo console. Like, they're going with this line that, like, Nintendo has raised game prices when actually, like, the standard is 70 now. I don't know why people still can't, like, wrap their heads around this, but, like, game prices have already been raised this generation. Nintendo's just catching up. And before you try and, like, spout some nonsense, like, well, Mario Kart World is 80, like, they already confirmed that they're going to raise prices again for Grand Theft Auto 6, right? This entire gigantic cope that Nintendo Switch 2 is somehow more expensive than $3,000 gaming PCs, $1,000 tablets, or like $700 PS5 Pros is just laughably off base, right? The giant cope you have right now is that people are like legit trying to tell you that like, oh, nobody's gonna pay for a Nintendo because that's a lesser brand. They really want to cling on to this idea that Nintendo is some like lesser secondary piece of hardware that people don't actually like or enjoy, right? They really want you to believe that Switch is not competitive spec-wise with PlayStation or Xbox, right? Like, this has always been the cope, ever since like, even in the N64 days, this was true, where they like try and sit there and tell you that like the hardware's not up to snuff, like they try and tell you that there's all these better options out there, and there just aren't, ever at any point. I'll give you a good example. The PS1. The only thing that made the PS1 relevant, RPGs, right? Like, oh, Final Fantasy VII, it's the greatest thing ever. No, it's not. Pokemon comes out in the Game Boy and demolishes it. Not only that with that specific title, but like way down the road, expanding into like, a wide range of spin-off games, a multimedia franchise, a card game, anime, like Pokemon was way bigger than any JRPG on PlayStation, And yet, the cope for the past 30 years is that, well, the N64 didn't have RPGs. Okay, but Pokemon is right there, Like, it's just a giant cope. Oh, N64 didn't have RPGs. Like, PlayStation didn't have games, period. Ocarina of Time by itself is, like, worth more than, like, the entire PS1 library. Super Smash Bros. Pokemon Snap. Like F-Zero X. Like all of these games are all stuff that I've gotten way more mileage off of over the past 30 years than like any other piece of technology I've ever experienced, right? And the narrative has always been that the N64 was a failure. And if, like, pressed on it, like, the cope is that, like, well, it was only successful in America. Yeah, the biggest market in the world at the time. Like, that isn't a flex, And that's kind of what we're seeing here now, right? With the Switch 2 out, with the Switch 2 revealed, with now that we know what it is, and, like, the games it's going to play it, how it's going to transition, from the Switch 1 to the Switch 2. Now that we know, like, everything about this thing, the launch window games, this thing is clearly slated to be successful, right? But people cannot bring themselves to admit it. Because acknowledging that Nintendo is releasing this console and that it is slated to be hugely successful, on par with the original Switch, that would be admitting defeat, They would be kneeling towards to Nintendo, and that's just something that like the industry is just going to desperately try and downplay and ignore for as long as possible. Like it's kind of crazy. Last year they were like shilling Astrobot and trying to call it the greatest 3D platformer ever made, and now, not even a year later, we have like a Donkey Kong Bonanza that's clearly going to outperform it. You have not a peep from the industry, by the way. You have Mario Kart World, right? The industry is trying everything it can do to like try and pretend that like the game looks boring or that it has all these issues or that like it's not like it's just bloated or whatever. People are complaining about like how they're handling like the visual upgrades and stuff like that. Like, it's all just a giant cope. Like a magnificent giant like cope from people who just cannot admit that all of their criticisms towards Nintendo just have no basis in reality at all. Because this is the thing that gets me about this, like the initial wave of controversy in regards to Switch 2. Like, you saw these people come out immediately, like making things up, claiming that games would cost $90, claiming that like tariffs would raise the Switch price significantly, claiming that like claiming that Nintendo doesn't have anything else in the pipeline other than what they showed off in this direct. All of these things are just obviously just gigantic, massive, like Kamehameha copes, right? And all of them over the past week have been denounced and dismissed, right? Like, there is like, it's kind of crazy to see where we're at now, after that initial wave of like trying to control the narrative and keep it negative, just how positive people are about the console, right? Like, again, I can't begin to tell you just how hyped I am for this thing, and I know I'm not the only one, and YouTubers can cry all they want, but like, the harder they cry, the bigger the backlash is going to be when like people finally have enough of their nonsense, like we saw this with Pokemon to a certain extent, we saw this with like the Wii U, right? Like, these people exaggerate every single negative thing so much that when there's a massive influx of people who like the game for what it is, like suddenly their entire narrative just kind of crumbles, and that's what we're seeing here, is that like this thing, the Switch 2, is going to be phenomenally successful. And you are going to see people coping and seethe about it long after launch. If you thought like Breath of the Wild was bad, Switch launch window was bad, like you're going to see it get a lot worse. Okay. This is the last stand of the gaming community. After this console comes out, there will be no denying that Nintendo is staying at the top, that they cannot be just dethroned, that there won't be any like new corporation that swoops in with their new hardware. It's over. Okay. Any minor success that any other platform has, Elden Ring, Baldur's Gate 3, like they're going to get ported to Nintendo consoles. There's no use getting hyped over this stuff when you can play the better games that come out on Switch first and then just wait for ports. Like a lot of people had to do with Elden Ring. Like there simply will not be any way of dethroning Nintendo from its throne as the king of gaming.